Well, hello everyone, and welcome to our event, OverDrive presents In the Know with Penguin Random House debut authors. My name is Meghan Volchko, and I'm the Collection Development Manager for the Public Library Department here at OverDrive. I'll be moderating today's program, and I'm looking forward to introducing you all to today's lineup of amazing authors. Before I do, if you want to submit questions to the authors, you can do so by utilizing the QA box, which you'll see at the bottom of your screen. You can also vote questions submitted by others within the QA box. You can activate Zoom chat, which should also be at the bottom of your screen, and comment along with the conversation if you'd like to do so. I see some of you are already introducing yourselves, so it looks like we've got pretty good representation already. So continue to utilize those as we keep the presentation going. So now I'd like to welcome to the digital stage today's debut authors. To start, Jay Chakrabarti's short fiction has appeared in numerous journals and has been anthologized in the O. Henry Prize Stories, the Best American Short Stories, and awarded a Pushcart Prize. Chakrabarti was an emerging writing fellow with a public space and received his MFA from Brooklyn College. He was born in Kolkata, India, and now lives in Brooklyn, New York with his family. A Play for the End of the World is his first novel. Kaelin Fogerty grew up on a horse farm in rural Massachusetts. When she's not writing, she's riding and training horses at Artemis Training and Sales, a show jumping farm in New York. She lives on the South Shore of Long Island with her husband, 2 young daughters, and a German Shepherd rescue named Layla. Andrew Palmer's writing has appeared in the Times Literary Supplement and McSweeney's, and on Slate, the Paris Review Online, and the New Yorker Online. He has been a fiction fellow at the Fine Artwork Center in Provincetown, Massachusetts, and a resident at UCross, the Anderson Center, and Yaddo. He grew up in Iowa and lives in Seattle with his partner and their dog. The Bachelor is his first novel. And last but not least, Freya Sampson works in television as a creator and executive producer. Her credits include 2 documentary series for the BBC about the British royal family and a number of factual and entertainment series. She studied history at Cambridge University and in 2018 was shortlisted for the Exeter Novel Prize. She lives in London with her husband, 2 young children, and an antisocial cat. The Last Chance Library is her debut novel. So just to get us started, I'm going to round robin and have everybody introduce their novels and tell us a little bit about them. So to kick us off, I'm going to start with you, Jay.
Thank you so much, Meghan, and thank you to OverDrive and the community and Penguin Random House for this event, and to my debut authors who are with me today. So Play for the End of the World is a story about a survivor from the Warsaw Ghetto who travels to India in 1972 to perform the play that he starred in when he was in Warsaw. And this is a play that's written by the Bengali playwright Rabindranath Tagore. And in India, the connotations of what that play means and why he's performing it are very different than what it was in Warsaw. In India, he is working for a group of villagers who are fighting for their right to land and fighting against government oppression. Whereas in Warsaw, the play was performed weeks before deportations to Treblinka, which would, and Yarek, who is the protagonist, was the only survivor of that. This is also a love story. It's about the relationship of Yarek, who's the protagonist, and another main character, Lucy, who's an American from the South. And their story as they travel to India and their story in 1970s New York.
Well, I have to recommend it. It was wonderful. But I'm going to say that about all of these books, to be fair. But I'm really excited to ask you more questions about that soon. All right, next, Kalyn, can you talk a little bit about your upcoming book?
Yes. Hi, everyone. I just want to say thank you to you, Meghan, and to OverDrive and everyone for having this awesome conversation today. My novel is called What We Carry. It's the story of Cassidy Morgan. She's a successful equine veterinarian who lives kind of a charmed life and is ready to start the next phase of that life, and that's motherhood. But then she struggles with some infertility, and after finally getting pregnant, she miscarries her son at 20 weeks. The rest of the story kind of deals with how she grapples with this loss. And it's told in 4 points of view. It's told from Cassidy, her husband, Owen, her sister, Claire, and her own mother, Joan, who she has a slightly tumultuous relationship with herself. The novel explores grief and loss, but more importantly, it kind of goes over the complicated weight of motherhood in general.
Thank you so much, Kaelin. It's, again, also a great book. Well, next up, Andrew, if you could tell us a little bit about The Bachelor.
Yeah, thanks so much, Meghan. Thanks also to OverDrive, Random House, all the attendees, and my fellow authors. It's so nice to be here. So The Bachelor is the story of a young man, a writer, who is coming off a pretty serious breakup. He leaves Canada, where he's been living with his girlfriend, and returns to his hometown of Des Moines, Iowa. There he is house sitting for a family friend, and without much to do, he becomes deeply fascinated by the reality TV show The Bachelor on the one hand, and on the other hand, with the 20th century poet John Berryman. And so these dual fascinations sort of guide his path through the rest of the story. With The Bachelor, he's surprised by how emotionally invested he becomes in the fates of the characters, even as he recognizes sort of how silly and sometimes cruel the show can be. And with Berryman, he's really interested in how full of turmoil his life was. His father committed suicide when Berryman was 11. Berryman was an alcoholic and a depressive, and yet also really charismatic and a great poet. Whereas the narrator's life feels relatively uneventful. But as the story progresses, he comes into contact with multiple women, and his life begins to resemble in strange ways both the plot of the TV show The Bachelor and in certain ways the life of John Berryman.
It's also a great read. So add that to your TBR if it's not already on there. And again, last but not least, Freya Sampson, if you could talk a bit about your book, The Last Chance Library.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, thanks so much to OverDrive and Penguin Random House. Zoom full of librarians. This is my absolute idea of heaven, because my book is called The Last Chance Library. And it is about a shy young woman called June who lives in a fictional English village called Chalcot. And June's mother passed away 8 years ago, and her life has really kind of ground to a halt since then. She's grieving still, and she really has created a little world for herself in books. She works in her local library, a job that she loves, and then she comes home to her house where she grew up, and she rereads her favourite childhood books. And then one day the local council announced that they're looking at closing 6 libraries in the county, which is something that is sadly happening lots here in the UK. And June's whole world is blown apart because the library isn't just where she works, it's also where her mother worked. So it's June's real connection to her mother, and a group of wonderful but rather eccentric patrons form a campaign group to fight for the library. But June's employers forbid any library worker from speaking out against library closures. So the novel is really about June's journey of learning to sort of step out from the security of the books and with the help of the patrons in the library, find her own story and fight for the library.
And also just a delight. And as I mentioned, every single book is vastly different. And so it's really exciting to have all of you here in one panel. So Jai, I'm going to start off with some questions for you about your book. So just one word, if I had to describe this book, would be wow. It's unlike, it's a story that I've never contemplated before. I feel like you've come at this from a completely different direction, that's something that I've ever been exposed to before. So I'm just wondering, like, how did you find the inspiration to write this story? And was there really a production of Dakar in an orphanage?
Yeah, thank you, Meghan. So in fact, this is based on a historical event. In July 18th of 1942, the play The Post Office, or Dakar as it's referred to in Bengali, was performed in the Warsaw Ghetto in the orphanage of Janusz Korczak with his almost 200 children. And so that was really one of the inspirational moments for me to understand, why was this play performed? And I had this question about, why does art matter? What value does it have in times of turmoil? And so when I kept looking at Janusz Korczak's story in the Warsaw Ghetto and the larger history of literature of that period, I came to find a really profound exploration of that question, which kept me going through all the different revisions. But yeah, it is based on that historical record. And it was performed, as I mentioned, literally weeks before the deportations to Treblinka.
And how did you stumble upon this story? How did you find this?
Yeah, so I was living in Israel with my partner, and we had visited Yad Vashem, which is the Holocaust Museum. And there is an exhibit there called Art in the Ghettos. And in that exhibit, they were talking about a play that sounded awfully familiar. And it sounded familiar because it was a play that I'd performed in when I was a kid living in India. And in fact, that was the play that Janusz Korczak had staged in the Warsaw Ghetto. And at that point, I thought, well, this is a really interesting confluence of cultures, and I want to know more about it. And so that set off my period of research, where I traveled to Poland and to the village in India where this play was originally written.
And your narrator, your main character, also takes many journeys throughout this. So I appreciate that you also did a lot of movement when you were studying and researching for this as well, because you can tell that's a big part of the book itself.
Yeah, I thought that was essential for me to feel it in my body, to feel that sense of place in my body, whether it was, a remote village in India. I grew up in a big, big city in India, so very different from the majority of where the story is told, as well as the places in Warsaw. And to go back to the orphanage that Janusz Korczak ran felt almost like a pilgrimage to me.
So we currently are in a time where survivor's guilt is in the minds of many around the world. So how does Yarek's experience with his own survivor's guilt shape this story?
Yeah, so Yarek is the only survivor of that orphanage in the story. And it's something that he lives with, but it creates emotional walls for him that he struggles with through the course of his life. And it's really only when he meets the other main protagonist in the story, Lucy, that those walls start to come down. And so they are dealing with the histories of their traumas. And he is somebody who wants to live a very ritualized life, who wants to live a very well-ordered life. And so while he can stretch and grow and be part of a relationship with Lucy, as he finds himself getting deeper and deeper into their relationship, it does bring up some of the traumas of the past, as is the case when he travels to India and starts to re-experience some of the moments of the play that are connected to his past in Warsaw.
And you mentioned Lucy. I personally have a love-hate relationship with books written from multiple narrators, which is something we also have Kaelin did, because I'm just a real stickler for writing style. And if they're not written in a different way, it makes me crazy. But that's my own bugaboo. So I think you did a masterful job of weaving different characters' perspectives and voices throughout the story. So how do you manage all of those different characters and keeping their voices straight and making sure that what they need to be saying and how they need to be saying it ends up on the page?
Well, before I started writing this book, I kept notebooks that were written just in characters' voices. And I have a set of questions that I asked my characters. And so it was very important for me to feel like I could understand the story from their voice and their major characters who were removed or who previously had points of view sections who no longer do. But really starting with that character foundation is very important for me. And the other question that I was asking is, well, what else does this novel need? And I think for this novel, for Yarick's perspective to be the only one, and he's someone who is emotionally distant at times, I think that would have been a challenge. And so I think as we bring in other voices like Lucy, for instance, I think we get a much fuller sense of their relationship. And I thought that was really important to have in the novel.
Be interested to see who's left on the cutting room floor, so to speak. But I thought Lucy's voice was lovely. And I do agree that she added a lot of emotional weight to the story. So thank you so much. Again, great book. And I think, highly recommend for people who just want to look at some of the events from World War II with a completely different perspective. And also I appreciated the 1970s New York feel there. And I just really cannot recommend that book highly enough. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, now to pivot to something completely different. Kalyn, your publisher mentioned that this novel came out of your own experience with loss and grief. Are you comfortable with elaborating a bit on that with us today?
Yeah, no, thank you for asking. Yeah, in 2017, I miscarried my first pregnancy. It was a tough time after, just, physically, emotionally. And as I was dealing with that loss, I looked towards the thing that had always given me so much solace, which was books. And, in my search, I found lots of memoirs and, self-help books. But I was kind of looking, I've always been a fiction reader, just getting lost in a story. It seemed like it's a little more general when it's a fiction book, so I searched and couldn't find it. And that's kind of where the the start of this book came from. And then I was, I went on a lot of grief forums, and that's where I met a lot of women who, had been through something similar to me. They lost pregnancies earlier than me, later than me. And, that's where I kind of felt I found a community. And after I had my rainbow baby in 2018, that's when I actually put pen to paper and started the novel. So I did need the time and space of, that full year to talking to people and just kind of grappling with things myself before I actually could start the novel.
Writing a story with grief at the heart of it must be really difficult. So how did you engage Cassidy and make her story one that was compelling and readable while still showing the gravity of the situation?
So I actually started this book in third person point of view. So I was worried that in writing this, it would become almost too much like autobiographical and like my own story. So I wrote the entire first draft in the third person. And then I finished it. It was almost like I was telling the story to myself a little bit. And I went back and I rewrote the whole thing just in Cassidy's perspective. So I had spoken to so many women, and like a lot of them were friends. Some were strangers I met in those grief forums who became friends. I tried to meld together all the different stories to try to create a character who was not just my story, but, the story of women who've experienced this horrible loss. And I wrote the whole thing in Cassidy's voice and realized I wanted to add a couple more perspectives, because what I also realized after speaking with my husband, and, miscarriage does not just happen in a bubble to the woman. So it was very important to me to include the husband's point of view. So the book was ultimately told in Cassidy, her husband, Owen, her sister, Claire, and her mom. And Claire's point of view, you know, she had a different pathway to motherhood. She didn't experience loss herself, but, you know, she was a stay-at-home mom, which is something that Cassidy struggled with, her work-life balance and motherhood. You know, I wanted to show the different paths to motherhood. And Joan, she's a little bit of a tough character, but I also wanted to show just how your own mother kind of shapes how you get there too.
And how do you write with compassion for a character like Joan?
So I find that, you know, she's a complicated character. She was a woman who felt like she kind of gave up a lot to be a mother, and maybe motherhood wasn't what she would have chosen for herself in the way that it happened. But I feel like, you know, as I've gotten older, and now I have 2 kids of my own, I do see, you know, like my own mother, and just parents and people that have been through it already a little bit differently, because, you know, when you're a kid, you kind of think of like mom and dad is just, that's their life, is mom and dad. And then you get here yourself and you realize that, you know, you have a whole life outside of your children as well before they came along. And I think that's what I wanted to explore with Joan's character, that, you know, she wasn't just mom. She had a whole other persona that, you know, needed to be explored and seen compassionately.
And, you know, as similar to what I asked Jai earlier, how do you handle writing with that many different voices?
You know, I did the same kind of thing. I had a journal, and, you know, I asked questions, and I tried to definitely put myself in their shoes as I was writing it. Cassidy and Claire kind of came easy. You know, they were both characters that are around my own age. I actually really enjoyed writing Joan and trying to put myself in, like, asking how a character of her age and her life experience would react to things. And the male perspective was not as hard as I expected, but, you know, I definitely tried to make sure I frame things through a different lens there.
And, you know, lastly, you know, as someone myself who has experienced a loss like this, I'm wondering what you hope people will come away from this novel understanding, and what more we can do to support women and families who have been in a similar situation to Cassidy.
I'm sorry for your loss. It's, you know, so many women go through this. You know, 1 in 4 women have experienced a miscarriage, and beyond that, just, you know, infertility and just the different struggles to, you know, if you choose to be a mother. If not, I have a character in the book who is very adamant that she never wants children. I really hope that women who have had miscarriages or loss read it and feel like they, you know, their feelings of fear and anger and shame and guilt can be a little validated, and just so they know they're not alone. And, you know, people who haven't experienced loss, you know, I hope maybe they'll know what to say, because I've had a couple people after reading this who realize that, you know, sometimes those platitudes that people say and hopes to, you know, make them feel better might, you know, come too soon, or not necessarily have the same effect that they intended. So I just hope, you know, that it maybe can open up a conversation about loss, because I think sometimes people just are so uncomfortable they don't want to talk about it.
Well, I appreciated your being so candid about such a taboo subject still that is, as you mentioned, it's just very common. And I do hope that this can help open up more conversations and open up more doors, and a way to normalize that grief and our handling of it. So thank you so much. Your book was a treasure.
Thank you.
All right, and to pivot way back again, and we're going to do this a big circle, because you can't go back and forth. We're not back to Jai's book, we're to Andrew's book. So Andrew, first and foremost, were you a member of Bachelor Nation prior to writing this novel? Assuming that you are one. We have a lot of Bachelor fans here at OverDrive, and I'm sure also on the group. So I just need to know, were you a member of Bachelor Nation before this?
Great question, Megan. I had seen a couple of episodes, or seasons rather, of The Bachelor before I started writing about this particular season that I write about in the novel. I wouldn't say that I was a full-fledged member of Bachelor Nation. I suppose you would have to say that I am now, although I don't watch every season. I'm sort of burnt out on it after thinking about it and writing about it so much. I mean, I think I watched this one season alone maybe 10 or 12 times. So, you know, that's a lot, and the show is already sort of longer than it needs to be. And whenever I get to the end of the season, I'm like, all right, that's enough. I don't need to watch anymore right away. So I've spent a lot of time with The Bachelor, have mixed feelings about it, probably a yes now, a member of Bachelor Nation.
Yeah, I know the most recent Bachelorette finale was 3 hours long, which is just too much.
It's too long, yeah.
Too long, but I'm willing to fight about it in the chat if somebody wants to. But yeah, so thank you. So, you know, what really struck me with this novel, amongst a lot of different things, was kind of the importance of place. I confess I've never been to Iowa. I don't know much about Iowa, but I really felt like I knew this town. I felt like I knew these people. So did writing about Iowa make you feel reconnected to the area that you grew up in a way that you found unexpected? Yeah,
it definitely did reconnect me to the place. I grew up in Des Moines and left there, went for college, and never really returned. And so it was a real pleasure to imaginatively return to Des Moines and sort of walk its streets and drive its streets and refamiliarize myself, if only in my imagination, through you know, these places which were so close to me when I grew up. And I think too, and this I'm sure is a familiar feeling, there's something about that distance which can even make you feel stronger feelings towards the place. It's, you know, once you leave a place, you really begin to understand it and appreciate it in a way that you can't, especially if you're, you know, a kid and a teenager who is desperately trying to escape and find something else. So yeah, and it was also, you know, I'm glad I wrote about Des Moines because it was, you know, in my own modest way, a sort of chance to give it some literary immortality. Just like, you know, I don't think I've read very many novels set in Iowa, or certainly Des Moines. So it was I would say a small point of pride for me to get that down on the page.
I mean, the only cultural touchstone obviously there's the writer's workshop, but the only thing I can think of that takes place in Iowa is the Music Man. I'm sure there's more, but I do appreciate and really did feel like I got to know, and especially having it be, you know, around the holidays, like that, you know, that the start of the novel, and just really appreciated like just getting to know a little bit more about a place that isn't all that far away from me. I'm in Cleveland, so it's an easy-ish plane ride if I ever get on a plane again. But I did appreciate that. So do you think that our modern life and, you know, current consumption of media and the binging and just absorption of everything, it leads to some of these obsessions that our narrator felt with The Bachelor and John Barrowman, or was this something that just came out of his own experiences?
Yeah, well, I think, you know, for the narrator of this book, both The Bachelor and John Barrowman's poetry are sort of venues in which he can think about issues of identity and self-representation and celebrity and fame. And, you know, in that respect, I do think that these obsessions are related to, you know, both the way that we consume media and the way that we are media producers ourselves on social media. You know, a lot of the contestants on reality shows either begin or end as Instagram influencers, and sort of appearing on reality TV is this grander extension of that sort of self-representation. Meanwhile, you know, Barrowman's poetry, his most famous poems were the Dream Songs, which are sort of narrated from the point of view of this shadow version of Barrowman himself. So he's strategically playing with this idea of a character who both is and isn't Barrowman, in a way that maybe parallels the same way that we're doing similar sorts of self-representation through social media. So I think there are certainly connections there.
And last question. So the narrator does not have a name that we know of. Does he have a name you know of? I'm not asking you to share it, but does the narrator have a name?
He does, yes.
Okay.
And I cannot reveal.
That's fine. I'm not asking to like make any headlines here today, but I did think it was an interesting choice. When I sat down to like review this and write questions, I was like, oh, I don't think I know his name, and like went back through, and just came to the conclusion that either I missed it or it doesn't exist. And so I do appreciate that in your process you do have a name for him, even if we don't get to know what it is.
Yeah, and I put it in and I took it out and put it in, decided in the end I wanted it out.
I think it's an interesting choice because names, even though for the most part we don't have the ones that are given to us, not ones that we choose, they are part of who we are. So I thought that was an interesting choice and didn't give me the opportunity to make any snap judgments, any thoughts about who the character is before I knew who he was.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, thank you so much, Andrew. And I think it's interesting that we have the Last Chance Library, and Freya, you're last up on my docket. So I keep saying last but not least. So good marketing on your, because we're going to say last a whole bunch. Your book was a delight. Just wanted to start us off with that. And I know you touched on this a little bit in your intro, but I was really interested and loved how your main character used a different tragedy, the impending closure of her library and the loss of her livelihood, to examine her own personal history with loss. Can you expound on that a little bit?
Sure, yes. So, as I said, I think at the beginning of the novel, she's really just built a little wall around herself. She has this very small, controlled life between the library and books and home, because she just hasn't let herself move on from the sort of missing her mum. I mean, she allows her mum, she works in the same place as her mum. They live in the same house. She reads the same books. And so the threat of closure of the library is a huge deal for her. It has the potential to sort of smash everything she's built. And initially in the novel, she does kind of revert to type, in that she doesn't believe in herself. She has very low self-esteem. She's very shy. She just doesn't think she can make a difference. She doesn't think she can help. And I think, a number of factors from, partly the memory of her mum, partly the community in the library allow her to sort of see herself in a way that she had never seen herself. And also actually literature. I mean, June is someone whose understanding of the world and of people is really shaped by the books she reads. And that's how she understands people, is she compares them to books. And so I think, without giving too much away, I think the novel Matilda by Roald Dahl is sort of quite central in her sort of journey she goes on to help move forwards in her life.
This book really is a love letter to libraries, and you've got the right audience right now for that particular theme. So I've got to know, what is your own experience of libraries in your life?
So I think, like I imagine everyone here, I'm a bookworm. I loved the library as a child. I always, I went to the library every week with my library card. It was a big part of my childhood. But I think really for actually up until my 30s, my kind of relationship with libraries was one where I would go in, browse the shelves, pick some books, take them out, leave. It was quite a sort of, it was just about books. And then 7 years ago, when my daughter was born, I found the early stages of motherhood really quite challenging. I live in London, it's a big city. I had a job and a life, and all that ended. And I felt really isolated. I found breastfeeding hard. My daughter screamed. Like, leaving the house felt really intimidating. And when I finally did pluck up the courage to leave the house on my own with her, the first place we went to was my local library. And there was a nursery rhyme session on. And I felt very strange taking a newborn child into nursery rhymes. But I walked in, and it was just, I felt this kind of immediate sense of, like, I felt safe. I felt unjudged. Nobody cared that my daughter cried. And it really, the library became my lifeline. It was the only place I went. And I kind of judged my growing confidence as a mother by the kind of how far I traveled to library nursery rhyme sessions. And I think the more time I spent in the library, the more I began to see all the other people who came like me, not just because they were there for books, but all the other things that libraries provided. And you know, that was really where the idea for the book came from.
Well, it was a beautiful read. And I also took my newborn to the library because I needed to get out of the house myself.
Yeah.
So I'm glad. And the first thing she did upon our arrival was have a blowout diaper. It was just literally a mess. But there were bubbles that she didn't care about because she was a potato. So I'm glad to know all the other kids were well over a year. So I'm glad I'm not the only one who's just like, here, I need to do something. Here's my potato that I need. So I do appreciate that little bit. And it was beautiful, beautiful book. And, you know, June's journey is, I do like the Matilda description as well. And, you know, was it hard to write someone, you know, at the beginning of the book, you kind of want to shake her, right? And just like, is it hard to write someone who is who just can't see their own attributes, their own good things in front of their own face?
Yeah, no, she is, I think the thing with June is she's just, I think we can see her qualities and she just has never allowed herself to see it. And it was, you know, what I tried really hard to do was to try and make us be able to see her through the eyes of the patrons of the library. Through her engagements with other people, I hope that you see June's qualities because she doesn't see them. She's quite down on herself. So, you know, there were other characters that I hope helped. But yeah, there were many a day where I banged my head on my computer about that character and just wanted to shake her, but I hope she gets there.
And I loved the cast of characters that you built around her and the community. I confess I didn't know until you mentioned it, the town was made up, because I'm not an expert by any stretch of the imagination in, you know, small towns in the United Kingdom. But I found the townsfolk and all of that to be charming, and them banding together to try to save the library and the unique ways that they did that to just be really, really interesting and quite fun. So I just wanted to thank you for highlighting some of the real issues that are affecting libraries throughout the UK and to a certain extent here in the US as well. Is there anything that you'd like to share, anything that we should know about the current situation of libraries in the UK?
Yeah, I mean, I think obviously the novel is a complete work of fiction, but it's very much based on a reality here in the UK. And before I wrote it, I talked to lots of library campaigners and library workers. You know, it's been a pretty grim picture here for the last decade. Lots of cuts to public services, cuts to local authority funding, and it's our councils that fund our libraries. I think we've had like 800 libraries close in the last 10 years. And some of them are replaced by volunteer libraries, which is, something I explore in the book. But obviously that is just really it's not a like for like exchange at all. So it has, and the pandemic has in many ways made it much harder and more challenging. But I'm not a library worker. I'm just a library lover. But I think from my point of view as a member of the public, I think, it's definitely not all bleak. And I think, one thing that has really struck me in the last 18 months of the pandemic has been how the role of libraries and how important they are has just really been kind of focused and come so to the fore. And obviously I'm preaching to the converted with this audience, but libraries in the UK, they were one of the last things to close in lockdown. They were one of the first things to be reopened because people just realized that you need libraries, you need digital access, the number of people who rely on libraries to kind of survive, to live online. And also, the library workers, and I'm sure this is the same in America, the role they play in communities. Our local librarians here, where they were the ones that were reaching out to those that needed food parcels, to those that needed to find out how to get prescriptions. They were calling up people because they knew, the library workers were the only people that knew that these people had no one else to talk to. So I hope that although it has been a quite grim time for libraries here, people really have come to really appreciate them and library workers in a way that they perhaps had taken a bit for granted. So maybe going forwards, perhaps I'm being naive, but it might, people might be a bit more willing to fight for library services.
Thank you. And I hope you're not being naive with that. And I recommend that everybody, since we have an audience full of librarians here, that you pick this book up. And it is just, I believe I described it as a mental hug to Erica from PRH, and I stick by that. So I just wanted to throw a little reminder, if you have any questions for the panelists, if you could pop that into the Q&A. I'm going to be asking just some general questions now to the group, and then I'm going to open it up to the questions that have come in. So we've gotten one in so far. If you have questions you'd like to ask the authors, please pop that in. Okay, so these are just for whomever. So if you want to answer, unmute yourself and start talking, and I will moderate if we get dueling narratives. But so to the group, how has your experience as debut author lived up to what you thought it would be? And in what ways have you been surprised by the process? Don't all chime in at once.
Okay, I'll go. It's I didn't really have much I didn't really know what to expect. It's all been very new to me. So I think one of the weird but good things for me as an author with a book being published in America but living overseas actually has been this, the digital experience. I'm doing chats at a library in Massachusetts that would have never have happened. So I think, although a pandemic is not the best time for a book debut novelist to be publishing, it's for sure. There have been kind of positives that I wasn't expecting that have, have come out of this experience.
Thank you. And I noticed, Andrew, you had unmuted also.
Yeah, I was going to say, my protagonist in my novel is himself a recent debut novelist. And so in a way, like I went through all of this imaginatively before it actually happened in my life. And of course, I couldn't have predicted all the stuff that would happen when my book was actually published. But doing that sort of imaginative exercise did, I think, prepare me in a way for the cycles of excitement and letdown and excitement and letdown and sort of connection and all the stuff that happens around the release of a book. But my experience has been wonderful, and I would say especially doing things like this and getting to hear about other people's books and connecting to other authors and readers has been really great.
Thank you. Kalyn, Jai, do you have anything, or I'll pop on to the next question? Jai?
I'll just say for me, the sense of community has been palpable. And yeah, I mean, it's not ideal that we can't all be in a room together, but discovering folks through this process and feeling like the writing and reading community for me is expanding has been really, really worthwhile and meaningful.
Okay. Well, funny that you bring up your character being a debut author, Andrew, because my next question was, the dreaded question that's brought up in Andrew's novel is, are you working on a second novel? So with the understanding that it's the question that you guys don't want to hear, are any of you working on something else? And if so, what can you share with us?
I'll go first here. I am working on something else. I had plans to maybe have a first draft done by now, but then I had my second daughter, and that pretty much made all of my time go out the window. And with the marketing of this one, it's been tough, but it's kind of in the same vein as What We Carry. It's about a woman who's postpartum and struggling with new motherhood, and she meets a woman in her 80s, and they become like unlikely friends. This other woman is grieving the loss of her husband, so it kind of explores unlikely female friendships and loss and grief, and kind of, it's hopeful as well, but that's where that one's going.
Well, that one's going to go on my TBR when you have a name, and it can go on to Goodreads and all of that, because that also sounds like something that's right up my alley. And anyone else? It looks like Freya is joking, so we'll let her be.
I'm finished, I'll tell you. I have written a second novel, working on it at the moment, and it is called The Lost Ticket. And it is about a group of strangers who unite on a London bus to help an elderly gentleman find his missed love connection. So it's sort of similar themes of loneliness and community and the kindness of strangers, but this time set on a London bus.
Ooh. Also sounds very, I love the kind of just a group of people and how they can find ways that they are interconnected. And have a sip of water. Jai or Andrew, do you have anything you'd like to share? We've gotten some questions in too, so I'm happy to pivot.
So I have a collection of short stories called A Small Sacrifice for an Enormous Happiness that Knopf will be publishing in 2022, and I've started work on a new novel project.
I love short stories, and I feel like they're finally picking up some steam and popularity again. I took a lot of classes on short stories when I was in undergrad, so I'm really, if that's already like got a pub date and everything, that's really exciting. Again, your writing is lovely. It's beautiful. All right, Andrew.
I have started a new novel, but it's in very early stages, and there's really not much for me to say about it. It could go in a million different directions. So yeah, sometime in the next 2 to 10 years, you can all expect something else from me.
Sounds good. And yeah, you were the one person who's like, I know how the narrator feels about this question. So I'm really excited to be asking it because you went into that a lot. Okay, we've gotten some questions in, so I'm gonna shoot it over to some of the ones that have come in from our Q&A. So this is to everyone. How are your ideas and philosophies of what makes a great novel represented in your book?
Okay, I'll try this one. This is a tough question. I mean, I read very widely, so I feel like I go between like being in the mood for a thriller or, you know, sometimes something a little more character driven, which What We Carry is definitely much more character driven than plot driven. So I think that's kind of where my love for like a little bit of a literary character driven with the multiple points of view. I mean, I wanted to explore in depth kind of what each character was feeling and, you know, what they're actually doing all the time. I guess there's not so much of that, but I think that's what kind of inspired how I wrote this one. I definitely wanted to make it a character study versus, you know, something that was, you know, you're turning the pages to find out necessarily where they go next or what happens next.
I'm a big character novel person and not a place novel person for the most part, which I was surprised by picking up on that in some of these but I appreciate that you took that time and just really understood what you wanted to say and said it. Anyone else have their comments on ideas and philosophies of what makes a great novel represented in your book?
Yeah, I love this question. And similar to Kaelin, I am drawn to character-driven fiction. And at the same time, I'm also really interested in how novels can explore socio-political realities. And so I think, you know, characters live in complex worlds and in fractured worlds. And so I think it's also important for novels to explore that as well when it's possible. So that's something that, you know, stood out for me as I was writing this book.
Okay. Next question. This is also for the group. Can you recommend a book that you've read recently or a favorite book?
I'm having a break from coughing, so
Yay!
I'll go. Sorry, everyone. It's not nice to have to watch me choking in silence. So one of the nice things about setting the book in a library was that I got to mention lots and lots of novels.
You do.
So actually, I think there's something like 55 books referenced in the novel, which allowed me to talk about, you know, mention lots of my really favorite novels in the story. But a book that I've read recently that I would really recommend is a book called My Sweet Girl by an author, another debut author called Amanda Jayatissa. And it's an incredible thriller set between a Sri Lankan orphanage and modern day San Francisco. And it's got one of the best twists I have read for a very long time. So I would really recommend that one. I think it comes out in September.
Do love a good twist. Anyone else have a book that they want, or two that they want to recommend?
I just recently read When the Stars Go Dark by Paula Mclean, and it was absolutely amazing. I've always been a fan of hers. Her previous books were more like historical fiction, like The Paris Wife, which was one of my favorite. And this one was less historical fiction and had a little bit of, the thriller aspect, but it was also very character driven. So I don't know, it was amazing and highly recommended.
She's from Cleveland, so as people from Cleveland have to talk up each other, I appreciate that rec. And we've gotten some comments on there, so about on the chat. So it looks like other people second that recommendation. Andrew or Jay?
I would recommend, I just finished reading the first two books in Deborah Levy's, what she calls living autobiography. She's a UK writer who was born in New Zealand, and her third volume in this autobiography has maybe already come out in the UK and is coming out in America in the next couple of weeks. But these are slim books that are just so sharp and lively and perceptive about what it means to really be alive today, but especially to be alive as a middle-aged woman struggling to figure out how to be a writer and an artist on her own terms. And I couldn't recommend them enough. They're so smart and funny, and also like really quick and fun reads at the same time that they make you think about a lot of things.
I love these recommendations. I want to add Dear Miss Metropolitan by Kaelin Fogerty. I think it's a masterclass on voice and structure. I think it's a deeply inventive novel, and I've never read anything like it.
Wonderful. Right, so I have one more question. And I'd like to thank Pam Gardo, who sent in these questions. So Pam, if you're still on, thank you so much. Can you talk about audiobooks? What do you think the format brings to readers, and that she's a huge audiobook fan? I am also a huge audiobook fan. And I confess I read the digital arcs of your book, so I don't know if there are audiobooks. I'm sure there are. But how do you feel about them?
I mean, I love audiobooks. I usually listen to memoirs mostly because I enjoy listening. I listened to Green Lights by Matthew McConaughey just because it was, a couple hours with Matthew in the car. But my book is on Audible, and it was interesting because, it's told in 4 points of view. So there's 4 different voice actors, which was really, fun to hear. When I listened to it the first time, it kind of felt like I was hearing the story for the first time. And this might be just for my book because it's like kind of based off of real experiences. I find people that know me have really liked listening to the Audible version just because they can take away my voice from the narration, so it kind of separates the story from me a little bit. So that's been an interesting takeaway for me.
The rest of you have any comments on the audiobook process? How you work with it? Do you get to pick the narrators? Anything like that?
I have to confess I've not listened to my audiobook because I'm just not sure I can bear listening to someone. I mean, I got to pick the woman and she's brilliant, but hearing my words, I mean, I love listening to audiobooks, but I think it's a really different experience to reading the words on the page. When you hear sentences, it's clearly a very different, they scan in a very different way when you hear them to when you read them. And I just can't bear hearing how ugly my writing probably sounds when a professional is reading it. But I love listening to audiobooks, and I use actually my library service has a brilliant audiobook rental So I get a lot out of the library. I think they're fantastic.
And your book was lovely. I'm sure the audiobook of it is also lovely, but I can totally, like, if they're recording this right now, there's a 0% chance that I watch this because I don't want to see or hear myself ever again. I think there's the reason why many of you are not actors, unless you are also actors and it just didn't pop up in your bio. But it's easier to kind of put those words down and walk away. So unless Jai or Andrew has any comments on this, well, then that is the end of our session. I would like to thank Jai, Kaelin, Andrew, and Freya for being with us here today. I really enjoyed talking to all of you. I hope that you enjoy this as well. I hope everyone on the line has added all of your books to their TBR and plans on adding them to their library collections as well. And thank you to OverDrive. Thank you to Penguin Random House for getting all of us together, and have a wonderful rest of your day, everyone. Goodbye. Thank you so much.